Hello guys and welcome back. So after we have all the basic things laid out, it's time we actually get a decent geometry instead of trying to say using like a um you know using like a Dynamesh way. We can now have like a real topology. So I'm gonna go for a zero measure in that manner, the geometry. Zero measure, right? We just zero measure this thing. Okay. Now that's why we don't need to do a whole lot of details when we're in this beginning like blocking stage. We have everything there, have the right proportion, make it look correct, and then you have like a topology like this, right? A sculpting ready topology. This is not gonna be game engine ready or whatever, rigging ready. No, not possible, right? Oh, actually don't want. Let me actually turn off the Sculptures Pro because we don't do that anymore. Okay, but this is good for sculpting already, right? Cool. And then when we're having this lower resolution, it's also easier to make adjustment because it's not gonna create any artifact because there's no resolution to create artifact. It's just really low res in this case. And we can start tweaking the shapes from all different angles. Like if, you can go to all those different angles and see if there's something that you see that's fundamentally incorrect. Right. This is the time you really try to fix bigger shape issues. Because this simpler geometry just forces you to think about bigger shapes. Right? There's no way you add detail on this, right? Which makes it the perfect candidate to see, okay, I can calm down now and think about the shape on the fundamental basics, right? Oops. Okay. Now to me this is more interesting to do than doing detail. Doing detail is boring. Really boring to do. Like sometimes I just listen to when I'm doing details I'm listening to all sorts of stuff on the background because you don't have to think that carefully. Of course you have to be careful, but once you have the bigger structure laid out, you don't have to be that careful. For the rest of the things you're making, it's almost like a plug and go process, right? And just have to be, maintaining things and, plugging into smaller things, kind of like, the process. So yeah, it's not requiring a lot of mental energy when it comes to thinking, right? So it's fine. Yeah, it's trying to figure out that contour. Okay. All right, that's pretty much it. If you just zoom away and take a look, you can see like similar, but feels like the wrist, this area could be smaller on mine, so I'm trying to do that. Okay, when you zoom away far enough, you see problem right away, right? So, well, I'm not trying to make the exact hand, right? If there's some slight difference, it's fine, right? Every person grow like a little bit differently. It's not the context of redo it, right? Not trying to do a 3D printer thing. Okay, it's more like studying and trying to figure out the characteristics, right? Have some fun, right? Cool. All right. So yeah. So then what we can do is just Control D to subdivide this model and try to add detail. Okay. Alright, now adding detail is the process of two things. One is adding detail for sure. Another thing is fixing problems down the way when you see those. Okay, like here I was thinking like I'm trying to do this finger, but it feels like this finger is not having the correct radius or correct section shape. It feels like it's flattened too much over here, so I'm trying to use the standard brush to give it a little bit more volume here on this side specifically. Okay, but yeah, and then it's just a matter of trying to add more detail, and this is also a time that you want it to look closer now. So I'm gonna go alt click on this thing and just drag it closer to my model so that I can zoom in, although there's not a lot of detail here happening on this hand, so it's probably better to find a better actual hand image for things like this. Okay, I think I can just imagine something down the way, but you know, imagining is dangerous. So if it's possible, find some more reference on this. I think that would be more helpful. Yeah, but I can see like structures happening, especially like primary up and downs. I think I can try to mimic. The primary bending area over here. Okay, when I reach to this stage, to me it's like copying a lot, because there's really not that much things you could actually ever remember from anatomy, because human brain are prone to memorize a whole sequence of unrelated stuff. This is related, but still, like naming whatever, it's kind of like you have trouble really quickly when you're trying to remembering those things. So you know, you just gradually build up that memory. Don't try to memorize it from the very beginning, and you always have reference, right? I can't think of a time for a 3D artist like to work without the internet, right? To find reference in whatever possible way. So I think it's really healthy to keep using reference when you have, and that's gonna give you a much more accurate guidance on what's going on, instead of trying to say, you know, from memory. So I'm trying to add the fingernail in here. And of course for the back, I also have something happening. Right, when I was trying to research on what's going on here, I did draw those circular shapes. Now they're in, those understanding helps me to better sculpting this concave area while defining it. Right, so maybe some wrinkles down here too. Right, just a matter of keep on adding those details. I think this might be a little bit too strong. Let me smooth that out and then add this line here, make it more visible, and then smooth it out. I wanted to make this kind of like almost like a diamond shape happening here in the middle. And let's see, it does kind of like extend it out a bit more to the hand. This is a bunch of like structure wrapping around. This thing goes all the way to the muscles on the arm to basically push and pull the fingers around to make movements, right? So yeah, those anatomical kind of like structure are really worth like investing your time to study them first, right? Yeah, it's gonna give you better guidance also on, you know, making decisions or trying to basically understand or not missing anything, right? Okay, so there could be like smaller wrinkles here and there on the actual bending area, but you know, I think our model is too low res enough to actually see things like that. Right, so yeah, just drag, and sometimes I use move brush a whole lot because it feels like it's easier to define bigger shapes than using other brushes. Okay. Again, here it feels like there's two high ground and one valley in the middle, and that's what I'm trying to mimic here. Now when it comes to this detailing stage, I think it's patience that makes you survive things like this. To be honest, I really hate doing details. It's not fun. The only thing that's kind of like making you motivated is like imagining how it's gonna look like eventually when every detail is there. Some people more like doing detail more than others, but to me, doing detailing is it's annoying. But yeah, you could sit there for like a day doing this while you listen something on the background. Sometimes I listen to like science, but you know, does get you distracted for a little while though. I think the best thing to do is not listening to anything actually, to you know, to really focus. Okay, yeah, especially when you're practicing, for sure. Right, so try to dig in there, smooth that out, then add something. I think this could be a little bit too big, or maybe this is not long enough. You can see I'm trying to fix proportion issues because there is proportion issue existing, and when you see those, you fix those first, right? And you always look for those bigger problems. It's kind of like a little habit. When you sculpt more and more, you kind of like realize that you have to take care of those things really carefully. So every time your eye or your mind is constantly filtering out other information but proportion, and you just go ahead and, you know, see those things first and then try to fix them. And that's when that is done, then you can go back in and say, okay, I need some more wrinkles in there. I can add those real quick, right? Which does reminds me that if I wanted to really do those wrinkles, I kind of need to subdivide this thing more. Okay. I'm trying to sculpt the structure around. Okay. Feels like it's more square-like in here. Alright, that's one of the fingers. So you can see we're adding a few like up and downs and stuff. Right, you can now zoom away and take a look at. You can see, well, adding those things doesn't destroy the bigger shape, right? That's the point. Like it should look exactly the same, if not like a little bit more detailed. Feels like it should be looking the same when you zoom away. That way, that it is more like guaranteed that you're not you're not making the bigger shape, you're not changing the bigger shape in the wrong way. Okay. I'm trying to, you know, digging a little bit more in there. Oh. I'm trying to dig around this thing. Okay. And then moving on to the next finger and do the same thing again. Right? So yeah, this is going to be the next stitches, you know, adding those smaller things on the fingers, adding like smaller winkles, fixing bigger proportions when there is any, and just gradually making better and better, adding more stuff. Yeah. So the finger now is kind of like it's going out, right? And it has its own curvature, so you can zoom in and try to do that too. Okay, and then just creating the edge for it. Now this is dangerous when you're sculpting this close, because then you don't see the bigger picture. You could make it too big or too small, so just don't forget to get outside of the zoom out and take a look at the whole picture before you commit more work on it. Okay, so I'm trying to also define the surrounding up and downs. Okay, here we can see some really interesting volume happening from that base here. You can almost see the edge of its budge in there, and it's connected to the top front. Right. Okay. Right, something like that. So one thing I think that's really worth mentioning when you are doing detailing is that detail could be overwhelming. Right, when you're dealing with details, you want the detail to be settled, to be on the ground. So when you zoom out, you see some detail becomes like something like popping out too much, and it's kind of like destroying the bigger shapes. You kind of wanted to start thinking about your way of sculpting, like maybe you're using too much of an intensity on your brush, maybe you're just not caring about to control the intensity of the things. Whatever that reason is, right, it's a really painful experience when you kind of like zooming in, do your hard work, and when you zoom out, you see it's wrong. Right? That's frustrating. That's disappointing, right? So you kind of wanted to avoid that, right? So always zoom out and then say, okay, I wanted to see if I'm getting this right before I commit more work, right? And that's something I think beginners, especially, you know, having not paying really enough waiting on, so they're waiting more, like making more details. Think that that's actually advancement. The real advancement for a model is the bigger shape or better. Smaller things added in is supplementary, and you will spend a lot of times in a lot of stages on the tweaking of the bigger shapes. Okay, using a whole lot of more brush. Right, sometimes to me it's like you know, the brush I use like for very repetitive kind of like way, like I just have to see the bigger picture and have to see that I'm getting it right, and using move is going to be the way I can achieve that without a lot of distractions. So a little budge in here and another one in there, right? Now proportion is more important, so that's what I'm trying to see, this gap, right, where this line is. That's gonna be more important than the shape of this guy or the shape of this guy. Okay, maybe it's digging a little bit more in there, smooth it out. Okay, something in there. A little technical thing here. If you do realize or feel like your standard brush is making a weird texture when you draw it out, you can go to the lazy mouse settings and change the step to 0.1. Don't know why it's 0.25 in the default settings, but it's giving you this really like it's not there anymore. You can see it's more smooth, right? But it's also stronger, so you kind of lower down the resolution, the intensity to something like half of before, and it should feel like before intensity-wise, but it's gonna be also more smooth when you draw a line out. Okay. Okay, a few more up and downs here. It's basically personal preference on what brush to use for those things. And you can try out different combinations of different like brushes. Clay Build Up is pretty popular because it's generating this really nice texture, and it's kind of like more constructive, so you can build anything without worrying too much of what's happening underneath. Right, but also for standard brush, it's more like giving you a really smooth result. I personally like to use Clay Build Up more than standard brush, unless I'm sculpting like folding, because folding is actually easier to do with the standard brush, as I have tested. But again, there are like folding brushes out there if you want to try these things for the folding. Okay, all right, so some structure over there. Okay, this is like the combination of those 8 small joints governing this area, which could look a bit complicated. Alright, I think I'm losing some volume in here. It feels like more flattened. So I'm trying to use Clay Build Up to add that part of a, don't know if it's, you know, some tissue or fat going on in there. It's kind of like having a budge. Okay, another smaller line in there. Let me dig around it. Okay. And again, just moving on to the next finger and repeat the same process. So yeah, jump this video if you see what I'm doing. I don't think there's anything new here. I'm just gonna do all the fingers. And then moving on to the next, maybe we can just do some, and also of course the back of the hand. And we're gonna rotate to the other side and do the rest in the next video, but it's the same process. If you don't think that you need to see everything, this is gonna be the end of this tutorial, right? Nothing else to show you basically. Just the process of keep sculpting. Okay, so here we can dig in using the standard brush, out and digging in. And then we have the 2 edges. Okay. And then smooth it out. We'll dig around it. Okay, there's some dip in there. I think that's kind of like the next segment of the finger. Okay, now fingernail. You go to this angle and you tilt it up. Oh, the intensity is 0 in there. It's really hard to see anything in there. I'm just imagining what could be happening. Right. You can see interesting characteristics when the finger is bending upwards. You can see this segment area becomes more like a concaving in shape. Well, when you're bending this way, then they become something bumping out. So it's different, right? So for this one, you could rest the surroundings. We'll keep that one lower. Okay. The back. Yeah, forget to deal with the back on the other fingers I just have done. Okay. Right. But again, it doesn't matter what process you go through. Again, it's like you can go over things in a crazy like order. Like you can do a perfect finger before you move on to anything else. It's not a wrong way of doing this if you know what you're doing. It's not the wrong way of doing it. It's more like the wrong way of thinking it. That's the crucial thing, right? Based on how good you are, you could sculpt basically from the tip of the finger all the way to the full body. You can make a character in that order. It's fun, as long as you're thinking about the right thing when you're making it. You're thinking about bigger proportion, bigger shapes. It's just a matter of, for beginners, maybe it's kind of like a wrong approach just because you're not quite familiar with what's going on. You're observing all the time. It's easier to manage when you do bigger shapes first, bigger proportions first, and you move on to the smaller things. But theoretically speaking, it doesn't really matter what your progress is. The thing matters is what you're thinking when you're advancing forward, and of course your understanding of the shape. You can see I'm digging in that diamond shape. Why do I see that diamond shape? The thing I drew out on these if I can ever see that, this one, right? It's really helpful to use like simpler geometries to draw these out, and then you can see it's easier to grasp what's going on, even just like a simplified understanding. But those simplified understanding is really helpful because they're simplified, they're helping you to get the bigger shape correct. Okay. The change, of course, is subtle. I don't want it to be like super overwhelming either. So standard brush is used to get smoother result. I think I would assume that there will be more wrinkles down there just because the resolution of the captured data is kind of like low res, so we don't get a whole lot of visible wrinkles. Okay. I think they're weakened also. Okay, draw a wrinkle like that. I realize I'm drawing it in the wrong place. Okay, anyway, so right. So I'm assuming some winkles happening here. Now the resolution is too low to do that actually, so I'm not trying to push it too hard. Okay, those winkles can be added later once you have the bigger shapes. Can be later on when you subdivide it. Right? It's not that important yet. And sometimes you can download those alphas from Texturing XYZ, and you can project those winkles from alphas instead of sculpting them yourself. And when you're done with that, you can refine based on that, refine your structure from there. Right? It's a totally viable workflow because those details are irrelevant if it's done by you from scratch or you use some trick like alphas. Because again, they're not the deciding factor of how this character looks like, right? Just something, it's more like a technical thing you have to deal with, right? Cool. Okay, one last finger here over here. Okay, index finger. Okay, there's some really interesting shape happening in there. I kind of wanted to mimic it. Alright, this is having basically the same structure we're having on the other fingers. So yeah, just have this part bumping out, a little digging in here, and then it's popping out again over here. This part feels like it's bending inwards more. Yeah, you can see bigger shape tweak, right? Whenever you see something you think, okay, it's worth investing on the bigger shape, something wrong in there, go for that first. Okay. There's some big opening in here. Smooth it out and drag it in. Move brush is your best friend. It's like I couldn't imagine working with sculpting without move brush. It's kind of like my go-to brush in almost, you know, all stages. I could hardly see any stage that I don't need to use move brush. If I'm gonna save all the some of the brushes, like 3 or 4 brushes, move will be one of them. If that's the only brush I have to use. I wanted to reiterate that little dip in there. Right. Cool. Actually, I have one more finger, the thumb. So yeah, yeah. It's as you can see, well, this is repetitive, and when it's repetitive, it's boring. Right. I keep saying it's boring. Hopefully that's not already boring for you. Okay, cool. So yeah, just sculpt the rest of the fingers. Okay. Some people are asking, like, you know, how confident when you're sculpting. It's not about confidence. It's not about speed either. It's about understanding. When you're understanding, you don't need confidence. You can just do it, right? If you can see, like, a lot of some people are doing demos. They're like fast. They're like, you know, almost like they somehow can do it because they're confident. That's not the case. The confidence comes from the understanding, right? It's not like you have to have that style of being crazy when you're sculpting, like fast and kind of like, you know, don't really care. That's not the correct attitude either, right? You get faster over time, but it's not something you pursue, right? That's not like, okay, they're doing really fast, I have to do the same way to be able to get the same result. Some people can actually got, you know, pretty slow, but that slow is gonna get them there faster, because when they're getting slow, they're really calming down and thinking about what they're doing. They have a better chance of not really having to fix problems down the way, because they can make it right faster than the others, right? And over time, when you get more experience, when you're sculpting, you naturally get faster, right? That's not something you're like, okay, that's something you have to do to be able to, you know, be better. It's like when you get better, you're able to do that. You're able to be fast. Okay, so don't try to like say, okay, I have to be really fast. That's not the competition. That's not the things you pursue, right? You practice more and practice more, and eventually you just become faster, right? Of course, maybe from time to time you have that pressure that you have to finish it soon, right, in a production environment. But not when you're practicing, right? Not when you're doing this kind of things, right? So something here, right? Yeah, this is gonna be another pass. As you can see, we went through like a few more detailing stage on the palm, on the fingers primarily, of course. Yeah, and then we're gonna move on to the next video where we just, you know, advance more with the detailing, right, and just bring it to like almost like a finished look. You know, we're not gonna do the pores and stuff. Those are gonna be done with alphas. But the key thing that I want to go over in this tutorial is more like the ideas, like how do you sculpt properly, how do you observe shape properly, and basically how to do a hand using that method. Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's move on to the next video.